Hi, I'm your state treasurer, Colleen Davis. I've started this new project, which is where we want to talk with the thought leaders here in Delaware, especially those that intersect with the work that I do in the treasurer's office. Today, we have Secretary Rick Geisenberger joining us. Secretary Geisenberger, thank you so much for joining me today. You've been in your current role as Secretary of Finance since Governor Carney took office in 2017. What led you to finance and working with the state, and what are some of the services that your department provides every day to Delawareans? Because I know you were working in the private sector for a period of time and you had your own transitions as well.
Well, first, let me say thanks for this opportunity to join you. So I love working with the State Treasurer's Office and working with you. So it's been a really enjoyable year, a little more than a year and a half. And so thanks for this opportunity to talk. So, I mean, I've been interested in public policy and campaigns for a long time. Going back to actually the first campaign I worked on was in 1976. When I was a teenager, and my degrees are in government administration, and then a master's in government. But my career background was always in finance. So starting off as a bank teller and a customer service representative, and then going on to be a lending officer at a bank with one of the money center banks. And then I worked for Delmarva Power doing some treasury management work, and became a financial manager for them for one of their businesses, got into mergers and acquisition work for them. So my career has always been in finance, and my academic interests have always been in public policy and government. And so I guess Secretary of Finance is kind of the perfect marriage for that background. As far as what my department does, we've got the Division of Revenue. I'm basically your friendly neighborhood tax collector. But also your friendly neighborhood tax refunder. We've got the Office of Unclaimed Property, where we return $100 million or more of unclaimed property that's turned over to the state, getting it back to the rightful owners of that property, many of them folks here in Delaware. And then we run the Delaware Lottery Office, which brings over $200 million a year to the state's general fund. But, we serve in that capacity hundreds of thousands of Delawareans that participate in the lottery, both traditional games like scratch-off cards and the daily number, as well as the casinos with slots and table games and the like. And then we have a whole list of other duties that aren't direct to the state, but assist other state agencies.
It's funny because I try to support the lottery. Whenever my staff has a birthday or a celebration of some sort, I tend to get a scratch off in the hopes that one, I can support the lottery, and two, one of them will win big one of these days. So.
Well, I hope that happens. We've had a lot more winners in COVID. Actually, as a result of COVID, our scratch off business is actually up 33% so far this year.
Wow.
So a lot of people are taking advantage of that sort of fun, that they can do safely from home. So thank you.
Our offices overlap. I serve on 23 different entities, boards, commissions, things like that. And some in my capacity as treasurer, and others are by appointment. But what would you say your experience has been like serving on these boards and commissions? And what are some of the outcomes of some of these bodies? One of the things I think about is DFAC, or, you and I serve together on the Plans Management Board, things like that.
I've had a lot of time to actually think about that lately. We were asked, Delaware was asked by Puerto Rico's Financial Oversight and Management Board to talk a little bit about DFAC and some of the boards we serve on. And they really saw Delaware as a model state. And interestingly, as I was talking with them, we talked about sort of the financial situation that the state dealt with in the 1970s, of being near junk bond rating and having issues with how our cash was managed and things like that. and how we made a lot of changes in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s that helped us recover from that. And a lot of that were these boards and commissions like DFAC that were created, bringing together members of the public sector, but predominantly people from the private sector with tremendous expertise and the kinds of things they were being appointed to, whether that was the pension board or the cash management policy board or DFAC, bringing their private sector expertise together with us, who, behind the scenes, we do the work that supports those committees, but ultimately they have the decision-making responsibility. My experience has been really nothing but positive. I think we were able to tell the folks from Puerto Rico how, our cash is better managed, our pension is better managed, how we do our revenue forecasting is better managed, how we give options to college investors, people that are investing to save money for college, people that are investing their own state employees that are investing their own savings, how all of those are made better by these partnerships with bringing these frankly, volunteers from the private sector who have expertise in investment, forecasting, specialized expertise in their particular industries, bringing those thoughts to bear as we make these major decisions, and it's made us better for it. So while the staff work is being done by your staff or by my staff or staff from the Office of Management and Budget or other state agencies, the ultimate decision resting authority, the fiduciary duties in some cases, lies with those board members, and they just do a great job. And we're lucky that we continue to be able to attract good people. As you know, some of those board members have served since the early 1980s on some of these boards, and some are new, but we've been able to refresh those boards over time with great people, and we're lucky that people are willing to serve. And I think part of the reason they're willing to serve is because they're not advisory. They get to make actual decisions that really have an impact on the state and our financial integrity and future.
Yeah, it's a true partnership, and I think their contributions are valued, and I think that makes a big difference for a lot of people. You mentioned that Puerto Rico has been reaching out and sort of seeing Delaware as a shining star of exemplary work in finance. And just about this time last year, I had a conversation with the SEC about how we do our reporting for municipal bond issuance. I was among a group of treasurers, and there was a lot of grumbling about the process and what that looks like from an issuer's perspective. There's a lot of fine details that you have to make sure that you're checking off as you report some of the financials. And the SEC mentioned Delaware and sort of called us out a little bit and said, if Delaware can do it. So I think, can you speak to maybe that process of, what are the challenges? I mean, you mentioned historically, Delaware sort of changed a number of things, developed these guardrails to ensure that we never get to this place where we were back in the 70s. And I think it's important that we continue to be very wary of our history and why we have things in place today and how that's made us, better for it.
I didn't live in Delaware in the 1970s, so I don't remember it, but I obviously know lots of legislators and others who went through the experience, and learning from them and listening to them is really important. It's been a long time, but quite frankly, we could we could easily return to that if we don't follow these guardrails and continue to do what we've been doing over the last 45 years. But with respect to the bond rating, I mean, we were one step away from a junk bond rating in the mid 1970s, and we gradually climbed our way to a AAA rating in the early 90s, and then what we call a triple AAA in the year 2000, where all three major agencies, and we've actually added a fourth rating agency that has also given us a AAA agents in the last couple of years. And you made a good point, which is a lot of people gripe about the rules, but they're there to protect investors, and they're there to protect us. And my view is, don't gripe about the rules, just follow them and do them well and be communicative. And that's what we've done. And I appreciate, your willingness to, especially over the last 6-7 months, as we've gotten lots and lots of questions from our bond rating agencies about what's going on in Delaware and how the COVID emergency is impacting us, helping us to talk with them about, what's going on. And I think they appreciate that we are as communicative about what is happening here in Delaware, especially as a small state. Frankly, as a small state, they tend to look at us as being riskier because we don't able to spread our risk across quite as large an economy. So by communicating with them and letting them know what we're doing and how we're keeping to our rules and those guardrails, all of that gives them comfort, and they all, as you know, reaffirmed our ratings. And we were able in June to issue debt at a record low 1.1% interest. DelDOT a couple of weeks ago, issued debt at 1.6% over a 20-year period, which is just incredibly low rates. I mean, I don't think there's anyone alive who can remember rates that low achieved for transportation bond issue. So working as a team, we've had some tremendous success, and it's by keeping to those guardrails and having open communication with groups like the SEC, our bond rating agencies.
That translates to lower debt for taxpayers as well as infrastructure investing at lower rates.
Another thing that's translated into is, with the Cash Management Policy Board this past year, we had incredible returns this year. That was, we've had record low interest rates really for almost 15 years, and we've done quite well, but we did especially well in the last year with a 6.6% return, which I think something like $2 million that went to the general fund, which is really remarkable and was needed, obviously, this fiscal year. And, it wouldn't have happened without the responsible and conservative, but, good timing of that board.
As we move forward, how can we continue to help improve the lives of Delawareans through some of those initiatives of our respective offices and the bodies that we serve on?
Well, look, I think the number one thing we can do is be driven by a desire to help people. It's certainly, what excites me about working in public service, and I'm sure it's what excites you about being an elected official. I think that this COVID emergency has really pointed out a lot of opportunities. As I like to say to my staff, when things go back to normal, I hope things don't go back to normal. And I think we can learn a lot about being, just this kind of thing, and the fact that DFAC now meets electronically. It saves a lot of time. It saves a lot of money. We've actually had 4 straight meetings with perfect attendance, I think, which I don't think we've ever had before. So we're finding ways using technology to be more efficient in how we do business, which helps us save money. Ultimately, I think it will help us save on, in the near term, people want more office space because they, they're trying to spread out and keep 6 feet distance. But in the long run, by leveraging technology, we're going to find ways that we probably need less office space, that we can do things, save money on fleet, save money on space, deliver more services via digital government. We already were, before this emergency, investing records amount in technology, and I think we'll see increase in the amount of the budget that goes toward technology so that we can deliver more services in electronic ways. We're all getting very creative about how we do business. And, I have certain groups that I've actually found are more productive working remotely, working in the office, which ultimately means that we can deliver services more efficiently to the public. And so we're going to take advantage of those opportunities where maybe they need to come into the office once a week instead of 5 days a week, even when we return. So, I think those are some of the things that ways we're going to turn this emergency into opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it sort of speaks to, we were just talking about the bond rating agencies and how being a small state means we can't necessarily spread our risk in the same way. However, it does make us very adaptable. And I think that's exactly what you're speaking to right now, is just that concept of being able to bob and weave in the midst of a pandemic and figure out how to find those pearls of opportunity and how to really optimize them, and utilize it to the entire state's benefit. So
exactly. I mean, as I point out to people, we do the same thing every state government in America does. We just have to do it with a lot fewer people because we have a smaller budget than most, obviously because of our population. And it does force you to focus on what's essential as opposed to what is optional.
Yeah. And again, I mean, I think that you can adjust faster on a motorcycle than you can in a bus. And I think when you see that slow turn that a bus needs to make, and we're able to sort of bob and weave as a small state, it does make us, able to rise to the challenge of some of that national economic downturn that we're seeing. I would say that we're poised to continue to adapt. And I wonder, Delaware has been able to weather the storm. What would you attribute most of that to?
Well, I think in terms of state government, I think it's a combination of a number of things. One is our revenues are the biggest tax revenue that's been subject to COVID has been the sales tax, which we don't have in Delaware. So a lot of states that you're reading about that you've read that revenues have dropped really dramatically, it's because their sales tax has dropped. The other big factor has been personal income tax withholding, but Delaware hasn't impacted as many industries as some other states. We were very careful back in March and April to be careful about the industries we impacted. And so industries like construction and manufacturing and financial services were continued to operate at full capacity. Obviously, the hospitality industry has been very heavily impacted, as has been in pretty much every state. And we're working hard to support that. Obviously, the National Unemployment Insurance Program has helped a lot with sustaining people's income. The HELP program, which has been emergency loans to hospitality businesses, but I think probably the biggest thing has been this new $100 million, or the biggest thing will be this new $100 million Delaware relief grant program that's available to small businesses and nonprofit enterprises to be able to cover COVID-related equipment purchases, but probably most importantly, some of their fixed expenses during the COVID emergency, like rent, where the revenue wasn't sufficient to cover those sorts of things. So I think that will be a big help. Obviously the biggest thing will be, a vaccine. But Delaware, just our revenue structure hasn't been quite as subject to this. That's helped a lot. And I think we've just been a little more deliberate about making sure that businesses could function during this, that most businesses could function. Obviously, those businesses that are in the businesses of bringing large groups of unrelated people together to gather, that's a struggle during a pandemic.
It is.
We're obviously working on it and trying to be as flexible as we can, but there are probably going to be limits until there's a vaccine.
Yeah, I think that the approach to shutdown was very thoughtful. I think that there were a number of businesses that were able to operate safely and remained open. It wasn't sort of this blanket, decision that everyone was to shut down. And we even have some children going back to school and things like that. And I think that there's been a lot of thought that's been put into the shutdown and the reopening, and sort of just watching our numbers and as far as the infection rate and things like that.
And there are states and governments that have laid off thousands and thousands of employees. Delaware, I can't speak for local government, but
Sure.
at the state government level, we kept state government as essential business. Continued to function. We found creative ways using telework and appointment only type meetings to be able to continue to keep government open and functioning, and hopefully, and that's not just important to be able to provide the services, but it also ensures that tax revenue keeps coming in. We're not putting people on unemployment. So all of those things hopefully are making a difference in keeping the economy moving, albeit, with one particular industry disproportionately impacted, which has been unfortunate, but we'll keep working on it.
Yeah. And I think, as you said, it's a way to lighten the burden overall. And I think, in uncertain times, the reality is I'm grateful to have folks like you that are making these thoughtful decisions and approaches to how we do this. This is it's been really great to talk to you today, but this is a very trying time, and it's really wonderful to develop and to have this relationship, but really to see the great work that you're doing. So really,
again, I want to thank you. As as I often say, and I know you've heard this before, people say, Secretary of Finance, you're the chief financial officer of the state. And then I say, well, I am, as long as you don't count the state treasurer, the state auditor, the controller general, the director of office of management budget. We have a number of people all working together to try to, in a collaborative way, with appropriate separation of powers, to make sure that our finances are strong, and the state treasurer, under your leadership, has been doing a great job at that. And so I thank you for all the work you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to put out a quick reminder. If anyone is looking for more information, you can go to my website, treasurer.delaware.gov, and your website. Where can they go to get more information?
Finance.delaware.gov.
All right. Again, thank you so much, Rick. It's been great talking with you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.